I'm joined here this afternoon with Katy Saunders, one of our museum volunteers, who's been working on the Courtauld Connect project with us in the last couple of years. My name's Claire Willett. I'm the Exhibition and Collections Curator at Braintree Museum. And we have been looking at the Courtauld family and in particular researching the Courtauld Women, which is one of the things we're going to talk about today for this session on In Conversation with one of our museum volunteers, Katy. So today we're going to talk about Catherine Courtauld in particular, and that's Catherine with a C. She was the sister of Samuel Courtauld IV, who started the Courtauld Institute of Art, and she was also a sibling to William Julian Courtauld and Stephen Courtauld, who lived in Eltham Palace. First of all, Katy, Catherine was a really keen supporter of the women's suffrage movement. How did she contribute to this national campaign, do you think?
Well, the suffrage movement had started before Catherine was born, but the Courtaulds had been involved with the movement, and in 1866 they had helped sign a petition in favour of the suffragettes. So when she was born, she was kind of brought up in this pro-suffragette household, along with the Courtauld Unitarian household as well. They often donated their money to educational trusts and hospitals. And then growing up, she was growing up with the backdrop of the suffragette movement gaining speed. And by the time she was in her late 20s, the like of Emmeline Pankhurst had taken over. And they had moved the movement from trying to attempt to get bills through Parliament to a more confrontational approach, which led to an onslaught of anti-suffragette propaganda. And this would be very negative. They'd portray the suffragettes in a really selfish light. And so Catherine was able to use her art skills. She was a member of the Artists' Suffrage League to kind of counterweight that and portray them far more sympathetic and relatable. And when you portray something sympathetic and relatable and it's spread nationwide, you get more support. So she kind of helped gather more interest in a less anti-suffragette way.
And we can see here, we've got her picture of Catherine Courtauld here sat in her living room, kindly permission from Amersham Museum to use that photograph. And we've also got two of her posters here waiting for a living wage and her anti-ostrich campaign, which are ones people possibly recognise but wouldn't necessarily realise were associated with a Courtauld person. And it's really fascinating how all the women particularly were very supportive of the Votes for Women campaign, and as a company they employed an awful lot of women as well, so that kind of marries alongside and is also an interesting conversation to be had, I think, when you look at the politics of the movement, as well as the fact that sometimes these women went on strike for asking for more women's rights within the Courtauld Mill. So there's some really interesting stories to be had. The other thing that Catherine did that was really interesting, that I certainly didn't know anything about, and I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily associate the Cutty Sark, such a well-known tea clipper in London, in Greenwich in London, that the majority of people have heard of, but you wouldn't necessarily associate it with the Courtauld name at all. Can you tell us a bit about her involvement with the tea vessel?
Yeah, so the Cutty Sark had been built in 1869, but by the time her and her husband brought it in 1922, it kind of been put through the ringer. It had fallen out of commercial use from steamships taking over and brought by a Portuguese firm, but then in the time period of the First World War had suffered in bad weather and suffered a lot of damage and had to be kind of converted into a slightly different type of sailing ship. But yeah, in 1922, they put forward quite a large amount of money, most of which was Catherine's own finances, to buy the ship, and they bought it, and they were able to restore it over the next number of years, despite the material shortages following the First World War, and get it to a point where it was used for cadet training, but also given guided tours around as well by old sailors. And then I can't remember when, but when her husband died, she gifted it to the Thames Nautical Training College, along with quite a hefty amount of money to help maintain the ship, which then went on to the Cutty Sark Society, which made it is what it is today. But without them, it would have kept degrading, probably to the point of being used for scrap, or if it had been saved, it would have been in a much poorer condition than when they got it. So yeah, she really helped save the ship.
And it's a fantastic, I don't think I've been inside it recently, certainly not in the last sort of 10 or 15 years, but even just walking around outside it, it's a fantastic tea vessel and really good example of and such a unique thing that she contributed to saving for the nation and seeing the value in that. And I think it shows another example of how the Courtauld family saved heritage and things from our past for the nation, using their wealth and position to be able to do so. So yeah, really interesting story again about this lovely lady who did some really interesting projects, that something that we're not necessarily known about locally, certainly in Braintree district, and a story that we've been really enjoying telling as part of this Courtauld Connect project, I think, is these strong Courtauld women who contributed an awful lot. And in talking to some of the family members recently, I think also interesting to see that lots of the Courtauld ladies were always busy and always doing things, and that can be really seen in the work they did for the suffrage movement, and also some of the other work they did in the medical profession with Dr. Elizabeth, and lots of charity work as well in our area. So fantastic family. Is there anything else you'd like to add about Catherine Courtauld, Katy?
No, she just used her wealth very well, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you so much for your work in the project so far, and we hope very much to be able to pick it up in person at some point soon in 2021.